we as humans are quite partial to relationship. We thrive on community. But in a world that is increasingly disconnected and less physically connected, community is something that we really do long for. And sure, we have online communities, we have ways that you can engage outside of person-to-person contact. There's groups and things like that too. There's even online communities for ministers and for youth workers. But it's just not the same. We all need it. We all need genuine community. Everybody desires to belong, to fit in, to have a relationship with others. And we build community around common hobbies and interests, communities that are based around sports and activities. If there's an interest, there is a community that is engaged around it. Probably wouldn't be surprised if I mentioned that there's running groups, there's cycling groups, there's ultimate frisbee clubs. It's not just sports. There's also board game communities, and there are minister's spouse communities that exist of people that get together around those topics. A healthy workplace, a place that you work where it's a healthy environment, is also a good community where real relationships are being formed. We also find this kind of community in our schools and in our churches. It's surprising how quickly we can get attached to these relationships, though. How quickly we find ourselves missing somebody when they're absent. Things just aren't the same. Like if a coworker or if a fellow student is sick or out on paternity leave, and it's okay to laugh, we miss them. And it's not just because their work is piling up on their desk. It's because we really do miss them being there. We miss our friends, we miss our coworkers, and we miss our fellow students. You're genuinely missed. You've conquered challenges with these people. You've overcome obstacles. You've done great things. You've been successful. You've had failures with these people too. And so this builds deep relationships from time to time. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but I'm saying you can find it in these locations. But this is also why graduating, either from college or high school, is especially hard. We usually end up saying things like, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to be done with school. I can't wait to move on. I've heard it so many ways. Heard it 1,000 times. I'm so over high school right now. I'm so done with studying. I just can't wait to get out. I really don't think we mean it though. Or if we do, it's on a different level. Because I remember being in college, and I remember being in grad school, and I remember thinking the same thing too. High school is a little bit further away. Man, I am so ready to be done with school. I remember saying that. I'm so ready to be done with all of this work. But it's really not the truth. I miss it. And some of you may think I'm crazy, and that's fine. But I miss the friends. I miss the professors, the teachers. I miss the community. I don't have that now like I did. I still have community, but it's not the same. So that's where I find myself when I'm reading this scripture. Graduation for me was exciting. It was an exciting time, but also sad, because I knew that I was going to be saying goodbye to some people. And this is kind of the situation that I picture in today's scripture that we're reading. And so early in the gospel accounts, we read about how Jesus goes about setting up a special kind of community. He asks fishermen and tradesmen, tax collectors and others to join in his community of disciples. During his short ministry, they certainly go through a lot. Oh, how they get in some sticky situations. If you read between the lines in the scriptures, it is some sticky stuff sometimes. The stories of encounters where Jesus has to duck out from a crowd because they're coming after him. Or the disciples are running with him to get here or get there. They're in a boat, and there's a big storm coming about, and they're like, what are we going to do? That kind of stuff is tough, but it builds these relationships. And all of these crowds that get riled up and upset at them, and all of these instances where they're coming into contact with some difficult stuff, we read about this in the Gospels, and we don't really get much of the perspective of the disciples. But I'm willing to bet that the disciples, because of these encounters, really have deep relationships. They have relationships like none other because they've gone through this difficult stuff. And great times as well, also. You see, Jesus was the kind of guy that would make you want to be a better person. When you're around him, you decided or desired to be more spiritual. The disciples weren't perfect, and I'm sure they messed up a lot, just like the rest of us. But Jesus extended them grace, and they continued to stay faithful, and they all got really close. Now, many people decided to quit following Jesus when things got tough, and we know of Judas betraying Jesus also. But not these guys. He would eventually turn to them and ask, "Are you going to leave me too?" And they would say, "Jesus, where are we going to go? We've got nowhere else to go. You're our leader. Of course we're not going to leave you." And so I think that it's quite significant and special when Jesus looks to his disciples later on in John, and he says, "No longer do I call you servants, I call you friends." And that's a big shift, I think. It's very important for us to realize that relationship between them and Jesus. But just like us, there still comes a time when you have to say goodbye. That's where it's hard. And that's where today's scripture is picking up. John 14 through 17 or something like that is part of Jesus' farewell. This whole 2 or 3 chapters there. Jesus is saying goodbye, and he's trying to prepare his disciples for the coming days when he's not going to be there anymore. And he knows that these days are numbered, and he knows that they have to get ready for what's ahead. But the disciples, as per usual, don't get it. They don't understand. They are confused and unsettled and upset by all the news that Jesus is giving them, and they totally misinterpret the message that Jesus is trying to carry across. Jesus tells them that his time is short, and this causes some confusion and some uncertainty. So they start asking questions. And the first comes from Peter earlier in the chapter, actually the previous chapter. "Lord, where are you going?" Because he mentions, I'm going somewhere. "Where are you going?" I mean, Jesus tells Peter that he cannot come with him. Peter asks, "Why can't I follow you? I'd follow you anywhere. In fact, I'd give up my life for you." And this is actually the point where Jesus tells Peter, "Yo, dude, you're gonna betray me. And you're gonna leave me hanging." And he's so upset. But he moves on from that. And this is where Jesus turns to them and says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." And he talks about how he's preparing a place for them and going to make sure they're okay. So growing up as a kid, we had a decent-sized house. It wasn't huge or anything, but we had a good bit of space in our house. And we didn't have a large family, but our house always had room for more people to join. And that was my parents' philosophy. They always welcomed my friends to come. They always welcomed folks to come stay. And they're always hospitable, wanting to make sure people are taken care of. And now that we've grown up, and my brother and I have gotten married, and we're off on our own and everything, a lot of people in my parents' situation, as empty nesters, downsize. They want to sell their house. They want to get into a smaller home that's less to take care of and all that stuff. And my parents are adamant about staying in this house. And I'm like, why? Well, they want to make sure there's room for everybody. So when my brother's kids want to come over and stay for a sleepover and hang out with Nana and Pa, they can. Or when Haley and I want to come visit, we have a place to stay. Or when Haley's parents want to come, her folks want to come, we all have a place to stay. And they're very adamant about making sure there's always room for more. This is what I think of when I hear Jesus talking about his Father's house. For me, it is quite literally my Father's house. But in this case, this is what I picture him saying. The situation must have been very hard for the disciples to hear that they're losing a close friend and a teacher. But Jesus wants them to know it's going to be okay. Things are going to be fine. Jesus tries to let them know that he's going to make a place for them to belong and a place that has room for everybody. So community is hard. Uncertainty is hard. And not knowing what is ahead is also very hard. And it's hard for these disciples, and it's hard for us. So Jesus tries to reassure them, do not worry. My leaving is a good thing. In fact, he says, I'll come back and get you so that you can join us. But you already know the way. This is where the confusion happens. The disciples are like, what? What are you talking about, Jesus? Thomas even says, Jesus, we have no clue what you are talking about. We're over here freaking out because you're talking about leaving us and talking all this crazy talk about going away, and then you invite us to a party at your dad's house, and you don't even give us directions? It's like, what are we doing? And Jesus responds, my return to God will make it possible for you to join in the relationship that the Father and I share. Kind of breaking it down a little bit there, kind of simplifying. You know the way because it's me. You don't need directions because you're following me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way to relationship with God is by following after me. And that's what's bringing this scripture about. So Thomas thinks Jesus means way as like a location to go to, as a geographical location. But instead, Jesus really means the way as an expression of a faithful person's unity with God. There's your way. Way is a metaphor for life with God. And later on in the book of Acts, we read that the early Christians that are forming community are often referred to as the way. This is also seen later on as well in historical documents of Christians. These people following the way. The way modeled after the way of Jesus. And so this way of discipleship is the way that leads to the Father precisely because he himself embodies this truth and life that come from that Father. So it might be better to understand the scripture as I am the way that leads to truth and to life. In John, the writer of this gospel, Jesus is the Word. He's the light that illumines the true way to God. And so this gives life. So earlier, we read about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. And that was a big deal. And Jesus said he is the resurrection and the life. And so when Jesus is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's kind of repeating the same image about himself and who he is as this life giver. And so Jesus is bringing God's gift of life to all the world. And on another note, it is very easy to read this scripture and read these words as some sort of permission for us to start an exclusive club. It's like, sorry y'all, members only. And so if we take it really literally, you can hear Jesus defending an exclusive claim that for any reason, inside or outside the church, taking on these words is to mean that Jesus is my way, the truth, and the life. Now, that's not what he's saying, but that's the way we often interpret it. And that I have the right interpretation, and that if you don't agree with me, you are out. And for a lot of people, out doesn't just mean out of the church community or out of the church group. It means you're out of the God club as well. And that doesn't go well for people, especially if they're intrigued about this whole Jesus thing. So to read this and to hear Jesus reinforcing us in these kinds of thoughts is to miss the point. So I had a New Testament professor who was a big German scholar, or he loved German biblical scholarship. And he used to talk about how you couldn't forget the Sitz im Leben, German word. And he would say, you must account for the Sitz im Leben. We're like, what is Sitz im Leben? And Sitz im Leben is a German phrase that means the situation in life, the setting in life, the situation in history, the context. So he's telling us you can't forget the context of the scripture. What's going on around this text for why it says it like this? So what's going on that we have to be mindful of in reading this? The disciples are upset. Again, we'll repeat that. Because Jesus is going to be betrayed and killed. And they're upset that he's going to leave them. So Jesus is reassuring them that they will be okay. And so why he's telling them they're okay is because in that day and place, in the writing of this gospel, the relationship between traditional Jews and these Jewish Christians is kind of strained. Things aren't going so well. They were outcast from the temple. They're marginalized as a community. And so with John's telling of Jesus' life, he's made sure to include specific sayings and doings of Jesus that are reassuring of things like that in the gospel. Those who are going to be reading it, John wants to make sure that they understand that Jesus is on their side to those who needed it the most. John wanted the Christians reading this gospel during this tough time to know that they were going to be okay and that Jesus will make sure that you are included. And so the text is not meant to draw a line in the sand against these people, against the Jews or any other religious community. In fact, it's to draw a line of connection back to the Jewish community from which these people are being thrust from. They're being kicked out of their own community, and Jesus is like, no. I'm the way to God. Follow me. And so to read this as us versus them is kind of missing the point. Modern readers use this passage as a weapon against others to defend their convictions and to defend their opinions, as if to say, Jesus is my way. And if you don't see it my way, you're out. And so we do this with our politics, we do this with our faith. Churches as well as families split over this stuff. And we can't seem to make room for each other in the spaces we take up. And so Jesus is not about excluding people and kicking people out. If anything, he's saying, hey, you who are outcast already, you are welcome here. And I'm not going to leave you hanging. You guys have followed me thus far. You know me, so you know the Father also. And so if you read this passage with the opening verses of John in mind, it makes even more sense. You know, those verses that talk about Jesus being, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Those kind of passages, those texts. This Word made flesh spoke things into being. This Word made flesh was the giver of life. And that life was the light that illumines for all the world to see. So since Jesus is the light and life for all people, this way is actually very inclusive and not exclusive. When Jesus says the way, he means he made a way for all of us. Everyone is welcome to join. This way, the truth, the life pulls us into God. So that's the distinction I want to make. So much so that whenever you see truth around you, know that that truth points you to God. And whenever you see life around you, know that all life can point back to God as well. And that's because God's truth and God's life was given to the world through Christ. And so we see the fullness of God. We see God in his complete form in the incarnation through Jesus, who came to shine this light for all of us to see. So rather than think of ways to exclude each other and say who's in, who's out, who's welcome, who's not, I want us to hear this as a way to welcome. Like Tyler was talking about this morning, about welcoming. For me, I read this passage through the lens of a song we used to sing when I was in youth group. The song is called Big House, and you've probably heard of it before. And it describes a community that Jesus wants to welcome us into. And my favorite verse is actually the last verse of the song. And it says, "All I know is a big old house with rooms for everyone. All I know is lots of land where we can play and run. All I know is we all need love, and I've got a family. I don't know if you're all alone, so why don't you come with me?" It's a really cool song. Makes me want to stand up and sing, right? Ugh. So ministers talk about shared vulnerability. They talk about sharing vulnerability with their community and their congregation, and it having a big payoff with increased trust and deeper relationship with those who you share and who you serve. And so I'm going to try something here. I hope that you'll join me, because I'm not big on singing on the stage, and especially not a cappella, but I want to sing this chorus, and I hope you can join it with me. The verses are going to be on the screen, and if you want to join, that's fine. If not, I'm the only one embarrassed, so it's okay. So after this verse is a familiar chorus that you probably have heard. If you've gone to church camp or if you've been to the Y or anything, you've heard this 1,000 times. And it goes, "Come and go with me to my Father's house. Come and go with me to my Father's house. It's a big, big house with lots and lots of room." Right, they dance. "Big, big table with lots and lots of food. With a big, big yard where we can play football. It's a big, big house. It's my Father's house." Exactly. I really appreciate that. It's good. You never know how that's going to go, because you never know if you're going to get left hanging or not. So that's the point I want to make today. This is what I hear Jesus saying in this scripture, that there's enough room for everybody in the house. Why would we turn people away? And that's what Jesus is saying to his disciples. You guys are going to be included. So later on, you'll have a chance to sing this again before we leave. So remember, sing out, really proud when the time comes. Jesus is really up to something interesting here. And he's a builder of community. His attention reaches out to those who are excluded and marginalized, and he welcomes them in. He offers rest to those who are weary. He offers strength to those who are weak, peace to those who are troubled. And he has people in his community of disciples who would have been on opposite ends of the political spectrum, to the right, to the left, to the third part, who knows? And all of these people can sit at the table together and eat somehow. That's what I'm after for us this morning. Somehow these people are able to bury the hatchet, to get over their obstacles, to work together. And he makes room for all people in this community that would otherwise be left out. So instead of pushing people away, Jesus brings them together. And so as I mentioned earlier, our world is becoming increasingly disconnected and divided for all sorts of reasons. And I argue people are hungry for community. They're hungry to be welcomed into a place like this. And so instead of labeling people as this or that, or us versus them, or whatever, I'm encouraging us to do something different. To do like Jesus and to take the world that has all of its division, all of its uncertainty, and use it as an opportunity to build each other up. And so encouraging one another instead. So we can work together knowing that, as the pastor Cynthia Jarvis said, God's promise to love us, to make room for us, to know and be known by us never ends.